Інститут екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці з фондом Конрада Аденауера за підтримки Львівської міської ради запрошують до участі у міжнародному суспільному форумі.
З 5 по 9 жовтня 14-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень, плекаючи спільне благо разом до сталого розвитку суспільства.
Як спільними зусиллями досягати цілей сталого розвитку та будувати справедливий світ?
Як зберегти довкілля, біорізноманіття, екосистеми суші та води? Як адаптувати міста до змін клімату?
Які перспективи європейський зелений курс відкриває Україні? Яка роль бізнесу у розвитку суспільства? Як сучасна церква сприяє сталому розвитку? Крізь призму екології, економіки, інклюзії та екуменічного соціального вчення досліджуємо цілі сталого розвитку разом.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті isweek.org.ua. Форум відбувається онлайн.
Інститут екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці з фондом Конрада Аденауера за підтримки Львівської міської ради запрошують до участі у міжнародному суспільному форумі.
З 5 по 9 жовтня 14-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень, плекаючи спільне благо разом до сталого розвитку суспільства.
Як спільними зусиллями досягати цілей сталого розвитку та будувати справедливий світ?
Як зберегти довкілля, біорізноманіття, екосистеми суші та води? Як адаптувати міста до змін клімату?
Які перспективи європейський зелений курс відкриває Україні? Яка роль бізнесу у розвитку суспільства? Як сучасна церква сприяє сталому розвитку? Крізь призму екології, економіки, інклюзії та екуменічного соціального вчення досліджуємо цілі сталого розвитку разом.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті isweek.org.ua. Форум відбувається онлайн.
Інститут екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці з фондом Конрада Аденауера за підтримки Львівської міської ради запрошують до участі у міжнародному суспільному форумі.
З 5 по 9 жовтня 14-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень, плекаючи спільне благо разом до сталого розвитку суспільства.
Як спільними зусиллями досягати цілей сталого розвитку та будувати справедливий світ?
Як зберегти довкілля, біорізноманіття, екосистеми суші та води? Як адаптувати міста до змін клімату?
Які перспективи європейський зелений курс відкриває Україні? Яка роль бізнесу у розвитку суспільства? Як сучасна церква сприяє сталому розвитку? Крізь призму екології, економіки, інклюзії та екуменічного соціального вчення досліджуємо цілі сталого розвитку разом.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті isweek.org.ua. Форум відбувається онлайн.
Є.
Good morning, everyone. Today we are starting our session, and it is dedicated to the topic of restoration of ecosystem and biodiversity as a top priority of the decade, urgent steps and needs of humanity. It is quite a broad topic and a very complex one, and sometimes for Ukrainian citizens it is a new one, because when we talk about ecosystems and biodiversity, these are very complex notions, and all of these notions are known only in a narrow circle of people. But today we will try to understand in practice what is the meaning of ecosystem and biodiversity and its restoration. What is the meaning of ecosystem as we are part of it? Human beings are part of ecosystems. How do we preserve them from anthropogenic impact? And what do people do globally, internationally, on their level, as well as in Ukraine? So we will try to understand the nature of their function on all these levels as the fundamentals of our existence. And today I want to introduce our panelists here, and the first to present is the representative of Global Catholic Climate Movement, Laudato Si movement from Kenya. Then we also have Katerina Polyanska, environmental scientist from ISO Environmental People Law, Tarasia Melanet, senior expert of WWF Ukraine, coordinator of the project Open Waters for Wild Fauna in the Carpathians, and Natalia Subotina, who is leading expert of the sector of integrity and corruption, prevention of the city head administration department of the Lviv City Council. So at first we will invite to talk about more about Healthy Planet, Healthy People project and some global aspects of preservation of ecosystems. Caroline Curie from who also works on climate change prevention, Laudato Si movement, which is an international movement. So Caroline, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. My name is Caroline Keru. I work with the Laudato Si movement as the Biodiversity and Climate Justice campaign manager. It is a pleasure to be with you today discussing this very important issue ahead of global engagements that are coming up, and I am glad to be here. I just wanted to say I'm happy to be here and that we are looking forward to having very fruitful deliberations as we head into this conversation. Thank you, Lana.
Чи забезпечується у нас переклад? Так, гаразд.
Yes, do we have the interpretation on? Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes? Would it be comfortable? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. You're ready.
Oh, do I go ahead?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you so much. Just talking about the planet that we are living in, we are living at a time where it has been called the sixth mass extinction of a lot of the species that are on the earth as we are right now. And we are also living in a time where the climate change effects and impacts are being felt more than ever across the world. And we have wanted to be discussing about this climate justice situation, the effects that we are feeling. Raising up the voice of the vulnerable as well is a very topical and very timely conversation to have ahead of the COP26 that would be happening later on this year, and to bring to fruition or bring to the front our ask from our leaders to protect our common home. And that takes me now to our my presentation, looking around the interconnected nature of these two topics that we are discussing, that is biodiversity loss and climate change. And we do recognize that biodiversity loss is a big threat to humans as climate change is. And if we do continue, losing a lot of this will undermine our ability to even address the Paris Agreement contributions that we had then for the 1.5. We are going to look at not being able to address poverty concerns, food and water security conversations, health. We are living at a time where we have COVID-19, and it has really shaken us in ways and forms that we didn't know we'd have to adapt, moving forward. And even our own aspects of living, we are affected economically. So if we do lose biodiversity, then that also exacerbates a lot of these conversations around climate change. And it is very clear from reports that have come out this year that human activity is the center, is the epitome, is the actual thing that is promoting climate change. And we do this by clearing forest land. We are talking about areas like Congo Basin, the Amazon. We're looking at the Asia Oceania, the marine life. A lot of that has been depleted. And reports like IPCC and others that are out there is really putting it to the forefront, if we do not want to accept it yet, that we are major contributors of the climate change that we are seeing and feeling and experiencing right now. We have floods, we have drought, we have food insecurity, we have water shortage, we have extreme weather events, we have wildfires. And if we look at our newspapers, at our news sources, we are seeing this as a very topical issue that needs to be addressed. So as a biodiversity and climate change campaign manager, I am here to work together with you to look into this conversation and address and see areas of how we can address these issues, because as we celebrate creation, we must protect the same creation that we are celebrating. And we can only do so if we do come together in dialogues like this ones and more action-oriented engagements to see that we are reflecting and we are promoting and we are protecting our common home. So thank you so much, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carol. And please, will you tell us a few words representing our Catholic petition of healthy planet and healthy people, and why people should care about biodiversity?
Thank you, Lana. We are looking at 2021. It has been called a super year for bold actions to be taken along the lines of biodiversity, climate crisis, and even ecological justice. And even as we go into COP26, which is taking place in a couple of weeks, we have seen climate justice actors. We've seen the youth, we've seen the civil society groups and other organized entities, inclusive of the IPLCs, that is the indigenous communities, calling for our leaders to have bold actions as we seek to protect our common home. And of course, this is a critical moment where we have the opportunity to demand for the leaders to come out with bold and just actions ahead of the ecological crises that we are experiencing at the moment. And as Laudato Si, we have been looking into all these compounded events that are out there. We have the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. We have other countries that are coming out very strong and boldly to say that ahead of 2050, 2030, these are our nationally determined contributions. And as the movement, we have been coalescing this information, getting all this data, working with our movement leaders, and to promote the protection of our common home. And that's how we came up with the Healthy Planet, Healthy People petition. And we do recognize that as faith communities, we have the responsibility, we do have the mandate, we do have the space to raise our voices in the public sphere to protect our common home. And so the Healthy Planet, Healthy People petition is looking into how the common home, the families are suffering. And as we live through this period and time, we as the duty bearers must lift up the cry of the earth and of the vulnerable. And so we need to reconcile ourselves with our creation, with the nature, and with our creator as well, so that we can address and we can even ask and demand for bold action ahead of the COP26. And so our petition is looking at 4 asks. And the 4 asks is, one is to tackle the climate emergency and biodiversity crises together, because those two, they may seem very different. They have elements that are quite, different, but they also need to be tackled together. And then our second ask is that we must ensure that we have equitable global action, that we include the support of the most affected communities, that we do discuss around how do we engage and harness information that the indigenous communities have out there. The third ask is that we must limit it to the 1.5 degrees Celsius. We did agree this in 2015. And even as we move ahead right now, the IPCC report has said we are at a time where even that seems like a far-fetched goal into 2030. And we are seeing countries giving their nationally determined contributions, which are going to be looked at COP26. But we are saying that as Catholic Climate, as the Laudato Si movement, we are promoting no more biodiversity loss. We do not want the 30 by 30. We do not want anything. We just want that there should be no more biodiversity loss. And this can be achieved by divestment processes. We can look into carbon credit programs. We can look into policy formation, and even nationally, looking at how do our acts, how do our policies speak to addressing issues around normal biodiversity loss, and even promoting the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And then our fourth ask is that we must protect and respect human rights. That is vital, including the rights of the indigenous peoples and local communities that are feeling and are experiencing the climate and biodiversity loss effects that we have right now. So if you go to www.healthyplanetandpeople petition, you will find a petition there that has the 4 asks. And we are asking you to join us by giving the earth a voice and acting now and calling our leaders that they must give us bold and just transition processes that will help alleviate the impacts of climate change. And as such, if you go to our website, you'll see our campaign called Give Earth a Voice, which is a tagline. And you'd be able to sign our petition in support of the Pope, who would be at the COP26. We are asking you to humbly and cordially join us by signing our petition, Healthy Planet, Healthy People, because your signature and my signature will put our voices together, and we would have us recognize that there's always a way out by promoting this petition, by signing our petition, and that we can always redirect our steps so that we can always do something to solve our problems. So the time is now, the time is here, and I thank you so much for this platform, and I really, really look forward to the further deliberations and presentations from my colleagues as well. Thank you, Lana, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Carol, for joining us today. And if you have some questions, I will let you know just in a minute, because I know that you need to leave a bit faster than we planned beforehand. Чи є в нас якісь запитання? Через Facebook? Ні, немає. Окей.
Нема прямих питань зараз. Ви все пооб'яснили і прекрасно, і зрозуміло, доступно. І дякую за те, що приєднались до нас. Я зараз продовжу нашу сесію, наше засідання і поясню більше, що таке петиція і чому це біорозмаїття є важливим для України, і як це
some issues of, as you said, indigenous communities and communities itself, to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Thank you so much, and I will share the link for your presentation to our participants and for our petition as well. So all attendees will be able to sign on the petition and help us to raise the Catholic voice during the COP26. Дякую.
Summing up what Caroline said, she touched upon global problems.
Ну і в світлі двох, як ми їх називаємо, двох копів, двох конференцій сторін, які були заплановані, обидва були заплановані на осінь, зокрема один по біорізноманіттю.
In autumn, one on biodiversity postponed till next year, and the conference number 26 will start on the 1st of November in Glasgow, Scotland, and the actions by international communities and movements and local organizations are aimed to provide an immediate answer to the destruction of biodiversity that we are facing now. And I think the next speakers will dwell upon these things, including they will touch upon the research done by WWF, a worldwide foundation. So we're losing biodiversity. Almost 1 million species have been lost in the last 2 years, which is inadmissible for our ecosystem, which has existed on our Earth. But in reality, this problem has a lot of painful points, not only direct destruction of biodiversity, including through business activity. We have living examples in Ukraine. We're going to talk about them. So because business activity also poses a threat to territories, sustainable development requires us to look for solutions, environmental solutions including, but the economy tends to dominate, to prevail over other arguments, but we have our basic rights and freedoms, including the right to a healthy environment. We consume these things and we don't know what they cost, what their value is. If we knew how much they really cost, and including how much they cost to biodiversity in a broader sense, we would be probably more cautious about what we more protective towards our environment, and unfortunately, in view of the various processes that we're going to talk about, these bad factors prevail sometimes, unfortunately. We'll talk about what to do to prevent this from happening, and what to do, how to affect the decision makers. We have to understand that most of what is being done is sanctioned by the laws or loopholes in the law or gaps in the law, and they're not trying to fill these gaps. And even though NGOs try to do something about it, I give the floor to Katerina Polanska from an international NGO, Ecology and Human Rights, who is going to talk about the human practical side of their activity. I know that you do a lot to preserve biodiversity. You've been doing a lot in the last few years. Please tell us about lawsuits that you filed to protect our rights, right to a safe environment and to protect biodiversity. Please, we'll be very grateful if you tell us about this. There was, okay, the floor is yours, Catherine. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to make a speech, to my presentation of this important event. First of all, I would like to help. I would like to help evaluate, assess the scale of losses in biodiversity in Ukraine. Everything is interconnected in nature, including, and those climate changes depend on the state of environment in Ukraine. As for the global effect of a human effect in Ukraine, our territory historically has been covered by the landscapes, and more than 50% of Ukraine's territory is covered by forests and 40% by steppes. We have marshlands, valleys, river valleys, and in the last 40,000 years, human beings in current territory of Ukraine, our activity has resulted in only 17% of forests left on the territory of Ukraine, and most of them are secondary plantations. Those who which means that trees were cut down, felled, and then planted, and now they're not primeval forests. As for steppes, we have only 3 to 4% of steppes out of 40 left. So steppe zones have been destroyed almost in full. The natural growth have been destroyed. Technical problem, we cannot hear. Ми не чуємо. Only 1.6% of something which I couldn't hear is left. And there is a technical problem. She's frozen. The voice is frozen. Freeze. And we have agricultural lands cover over 70% of Ukraine's territory. Of them, almost 53% is arable land, which means that most of our natural ecosystems have been destroyed and transformed. Therefore, a disbalance has arisen in a natural environment. That's why we have changes not only in Ukraine but also worldwide. There are changes in mesoclimate, microclimate. Natural ecosystems are being violated, affected, compromised. And when these things happen not only in Ukraine but in many countries of the world, global changes occur in view of that. So, and these changes are felt, perceived by people all worldwide, because everything is interconnected. If something happening in one part of the world somehow affects other parts of the world, and we can observe the disappearance of different species of flora and fauna. 1,540 something species have been put on the red book as species on the brink of extinction or disappearing, endangered species. Including some number of plants, so I couldn't hear the number because of the interferences in. What should we do? What can we do to avoid this? What steps should we take? First, we should understand that the disappearance of nature is a comprehensive problem. We should protect all components of the nature, water resources, all parts of the ecosystem. And it's important to make sure that the environmental policy is comprehensive. That it touches all aspects. We need a regulation. We need changes in regulation. We need economic changes. We need cultural and social changes to restore, to revive nature, and to restore the natural balance which was violated by human beings. And Europe, in the European Union, they put forward this idea of European course, whose goal is to make the European continent climate change neutral till 2050. Ukraine supports this course, and the setting up of a working group task force, and the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine announced that we're joining this program, and the Green Course has different strategies and programs, including the strategy of protection of biodiversity for the period till 2030. And the area of natural reserves should make up at least 30%, of which 1/3 should be protected using tough measures, and there should be appropriate management of natural resources, and it should provide for the protection of all types of species of flora and fauna, and the use of dangerous pesticides should be lowered, decreased, and at least 10% of territories should be preserved as wildlife islands, so-called islands. So we shouldn't have agrarian or agricultural deserts. We should have some islands where animals and the plants can find a safe haven. Also, the network of nature reserves and the emerald territories outside the EU should be preserved as well. This network is developing in Ukraine. We have 377 emerald network territories, and the Parliament of Ukraine is going to hear a draft law on the emerald network territories, which will regulate the creation of such a network in Ukraine. The other aims of this biodiversity is of this legislation is a restoration of biodiversity and making sure that the rivers don't have obstacles through dams, and the reduction in the loss of nutrients, and the development of plans of plantation in urban areas. All these components of new legislation. There are many other items that to be included in this legislation, and our organization supports these ideas, and we are for protection of wildlife in Ukraine. And as has been mentioned before, we have lawsuits. We have filed lawsuits to protect wildlife. For example, one lawsuit on the protection of some areas in Western Ukraine. They are nature reserves, but they have suffered, or they may suffer from a negative effect due to different projects. They're going to construct a wind power station in one nature reserve, and green energy is not always eco-friendly. And this plan to construct this power station prior to that, feasibility study should be done, and it's necessary to assess whether the possible negative effect on nature. And during this feasibility study, the authors of this feasibility study indicated some mistakes, and their report has been found as not true, not accurate by environmental activists, and we want to make sure that this project is not implemented in this nature reserve, because the construction of this wind station, which will take 3 years, during which 34 wind plants or installation are going to be put in place. That will damage nature. They will to a great extent. So we are against this, and we insist that each such project should be assessed individually, and this assessment of feasibility studies are done openly and transparently, and the proper research should be done not in the interests of investors. The next territory we are protecting is the mountainous range in the Ukrainian Carpathian Mountains. It's protected by international laws, and it's also part of the Emerald Network, and it's a place of national importance. The river Tisa flows through that area, and it also flows through 7 different countries. This valley, investors are going to build a huge skiing resort with for 23,000 holidaymakers to build such a ski resort and to create comfortable conditions for them. They're going to build water bodies and ski lifts and a number of cottages and entertainment parks and parking places, restaurants. And this project is destructive to this valley and this mountainous range, to the slopes with primeval forests, and it's destructive to the very range itself, including ice period lakes and ice reliefs. And these ecosystems, valuable ecosystems, which are in a natural state now, are going to be destroyed or damaged significantly. Therefore, our NGO is very much against this project and we have filed a lawsuit. Last week it was heard in the Supreme Court of Ukraine, and it's brought back to the courts of lower instances because the Supreme Court found that there were many violations done. Yeah. And our organization is going to file more lawsuits. We're facing more court hearings on the protection of this mountainous range. These territories are not the only territories that require protection. We're also doing activities aimed to create more natural reserves. We're protecting big territories with wildlife, including green areas in in cities. We also protect the Pripyat River, which is around the Chernobyl power station. And they're going to build a trans-border project which would connect the Baltic and the Black Seas, violating Ukrainian and international laws. The nature of Ukraine requires protection at all levels. We see various violations of existing legislation and the destruction of natural complexes and the disappearance of flora, of different species of flora and fauna on a daily basis. We have to protect wild life to make sure that we are able to see how beautiful this nature is, and we want to see these marshlands, seas, river valleys, sea ecosystems, and to prevent them from being destroyed, from disappearing. We have to protect them because we are doing it for the sake of the existence of human beings, because human health is directly affected by human natural systems. We are part of nature. If we protect nature, we will ensure harmony and balance for the human beings. And our organization is protecting nature for the sake of nature in the first place. To preserve the integrity of all species of flora and fauna. I'm very happy, therefore, to do this activity and to raise such important topics. And I call on everyone to join our efforts to protect nature and to be actively involved in these efforts. Because every human being can make a step towards nature. Every human being can do something helpful, useful for nature, starting from simple things like spreading the news or writing a picture or drawing a picture on the topic of protection of and you can also write laws, you can make addresses to the parliament or do research aimed to protect wildlife. Our nature is diverse, and so are ways of protecting it. Thank you very much. I hope to have this cooperation with you, and we are really.
Thank you, Katarina. It's been of great interest to learn more about the steps which have been taken. We understand the reality in which we live and work, and we know that these are very comprehensive, but on the other hand, efficient steps. But I also have a question that I wanted to address to you, which relates to what you mentioned at the end, how each of us can really make some effort in terms of eco-conversion to make this internal change, to change our mindset and our attitude towards consumption, even when we do something very, very small. So what about this support that you can receive from communities, well, local communities, in terms of your activities, like local communities, territorial communities, what do they think about protection of the environment? Because that's the area where they live, and of course that they can impact the environment, and the environment impacts them. So what about this balance? How to maintain it to make sure that we have protection of the environment, and that they remain natural reserves? And I know that there is no one solution, because it takes a lot of time to have the change of the mindset on the societal level, as it is with any other change. But what can be done now to make sure that it starts happening? Because we know that some people, they reside in this area, some people, they come from some other places, and we know that they can gather some plants which are included in the red book, or they just dump some waste into the rivers, which is very typical for the Carpathians. So what do we do to make sure that people are becoming more aware and more conscious, for people to get this understanding that biodiversity is very important? It is not, and it is easy to destroy it, but it takes so much time and effort and money to restore it. So are you supported by the local communities? That's the first question that I wanted to ask. Yes, we do have this thing happening by small communities. They support the protection of the environment. And here we can talk about Warszawa and Svedovets cases and some other territories of Ukraine. So there are communities which get together, and they are in favor of protection. It is a great thing to see it, because it's great to work with people who are there on sites, and they show their own initiative. They are not waiting for someone to come to where they are to protect, to do something instead of them. And they just say that they don't just say that there is a problem and someone has to resolve it. They try to their best to fix it on their own. And we are only happy to cooperate with such communities when it comes to our organization. We have some experience of working with communities which claim that we really want to have some territory to be a natural reserve, and they ask us to show them some draft documents, so they're ready to fill in all the documents. They ask us to help them. They add this information, we verify, we correct some errors if there are any, and eventually we have very good rationale. Then Warszawa, that is another case. There are many territorial communities which are against the wind farm being erected there. Save Warszawa, that is an entire community, and it includes not only a local community, but there are also academicians and tourists and many other people, just common citizens who really want to protect Warszawa. They participate, they take part in court hearings, they also participated in environmental assessment report, in public hearings. There are also people who protect Svedovets range. This movement is called Free Svedovets. It is another example of a great organization where we have local citizens. And here I don't mean only citizens from that area. There are also very many activists who live in the Carpathian area. They have their households there, and it is environmentally friendly. They really want to share the knowledge that they have. They want to preserve the nature of the Carpathian region, and they want to make sure that everything is done in the environmentally friendly fashion. And they fight for Svedovat. They participate in all the campaigns and activities. They appeal to different agencies and institutions. They drafted petitions. They participated in different sessions. However, despite their existence, we know that it's very difficult to resist, to fight, because we know that there are some people who want to protect these territories on the one hand, but on the other hand, we also have some people who really want to build something there, and there are also some locals who want to have some benefit from the territories. They do not really see the value, environmental value. They don't really see the resources of these territories for their own existence. because they cannot really see the interconnection that if you cut down forests or trees and then you build something there, if you take, for example, a river, they don't understand that the water balance is going to change, and all ecosystems which are there will also be changed. That may lead to lack of water because there will be a resort close to them. There will always be a deficit of water, and it will impact the functioning. It will be impossible for them to have sheep in these territories, and ecotourism will no longer be an option because all those things are going to change drastically. And they support they support the construction of the ski resort because they know that that's going to give people jobs, and that will also help to the region to grow economically. But it is an issue. There are many communities, and on the one hand, they really want to see those possibilities for economic growth, not only in mountains regions, but also in any other areas not related to mountains. Even if they see that there is some area, then they want to do something there, like to turn it into arable land, to use pesticides in that territory. They don't really see it as a threat for their own health, and they don't understand. They're just loathing these wild life territories. They are not thinking about the fact that pesticides will enter underground waters, and that's going to be a huge problem. But if Ukraine supports the European Green Deal and zero pollution principle, we will see this connection, and it will be possible for us to minimize the level of pollution here. Well, that's what's to be expected, because we know that Western Balkans started discussing it because there is the Green Deal created for them, and we know that when we talk about Green Balkan region, and when we talk about fossil fuels, it's quite a complicated situation, and in the near future they are to become the EU member. And in practice, it will be possible for us to think about some high-level goals and high-level ambitions of the European Union, and the goals which we can accomplish or achieve here on our level, which is not an easy task. And that's going to be the last question, because we know that that is the Ecumenic Social Week, and we know that Laudato Si is a very important document which was made public in 2015, and it accumulates all this Christian attitude towards integral environment. And I know that your organization translated this document, and thanks to your efforts, it's possible for us to read it as translated from English and other languages. And briefly, if you could tell us what motivated you to do that, what about those principles of integral ecology? Do you support them? How did you start this process? It's very important for us to hear that our planet Earth is screaming. It's practically has lost its voice to inform it how hurtful and painful it is when the territories are being destroyed. And also to talk about some vulnerable groups of people who suffer a lot around the globe. And we know that the same is happening here in our country because there's social injustice and a lot of harm is done. Yes, it was very interesting for me to read this encyclic document and the views, to see, to understand them. How all of that is being perceived on such a high level. And for us, for me, it was very interesting to match this vision of the Vatican with the vision of people who deal with environmental issues, how nature is being taken, this world of nature, that it is to be valued and appreciated. And it's important that we see something which is higher in it and which has to be preserved, to make sure that we have the understanding that nature has such a great value because it is something which is alive. It is alive. It is a live creature, and it's been such a great experience for us. In particular, one of the encyclics when we talked about environmental protection, and I really wish that all of you read it. It is available. You can download it. There is free access to this document. It's in Ukrainian, so get acquainted with it, read it, and you can delve deeper into some philosophical issues. And it's great that we have it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Katerina. Yes, later we will also again remind you about the petition Healthy Planet, Healthy People from the global global Catholic climate movement. Thank you, Katerina. I wish you all the best, enthusiasm and energy, because what you do is very important and unique. And right now, I would like to talk about another unique organization which we have in Lviv, WWF Ukraine, which is a separate organization, which is in Ukraine. This is Wildlife Protection Fund, and we know that there is the project which is called Open Borders for Wild Fauna in the Carpathian, and I invite Taras Diamanets to tell us more about it. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to present our project here. It's very important to us.
Maybe as an expert in nature, I will talk why it's important to talk about biodiversity and what is biodiversity. I don't know what is our audience. It's important to provide useful examples to illustrate what it is and what our organization does, what contributions we make to this, to preserve biodiversity on the planet. I will try to provide a definition of biodiversity according to the convention, which was signed in Rio de Janeiro. And I would like to note that Ukraine has ratified this agreement. It was done in 1995. So we have some obligations according to this convention. Biodiversity, we understand a product of billions of years of evolution, including the affected by human activity. Biodiversity, we are an integral part of this biodiversity, and we depend on our life, that activity depend on biodiversity. It covers all different types of ecosystems, from deserts to mountain ranges to steppes, forests. And we are talking about agricultural landscapes. Each of these ecosystems, living species, including people, interact with soil, with air, with water, and that's how biodiversity functions. In our publications, we provide a simpler explanation. By that we mean any type of life on the surface, in water or in the ocean. It covers all organisms, from microorganisms to mammals to human beings. All these organisms interact with one another. They form a complicated system whose idea is to provide balance in nature and to maintain life. And in order for our audience to understand what is species, what is extinction of species, there is a good example how one species can affect not only one the whole ecosystem, how it can affect the landscape. As an expert, I would like to provide this example to make sure that people who are listening or seers to understand how important it is to protect even one species. We're talking about Yellowstone National Park. Maybe you heard about that. Maybe you know about that. There was a natural discovery made on changes in a chain. The introduction of a wolf in the system, and the topic is how wolves affected the river system in the park. What influence wolves made on the rivers? One might think that the connection is very little, small, but in reality, through these chains, tropical chains, of course, a wolf is a predator, killer, but in reality, it also provides a possibility for other lives to function. 70 years, for 70 years in this park. This park covers the area which is the size of half of Lviv region where we are now. For 70 years, the wolves didn't exist there. They had been killed, and deer were so widespread. They seized the whole ecosystem. That grass didn't have enough time to recover. So wolves used to hunt for deer, but now wolves moved from river valleys to other areas. This led to the fast, rapid revival of bushes, and which actually led to the appearance of beavers, who began to build dams. New animals, new species appeared there. Actually, they didn't appear. They came back. Birds and otter, and wolves would hunt for other species and hares. Now other species appeared. So this chain is so interconnected. So more bears appeared. Eventually, the population of wolves, a small population of wolves, changed not only the ecosystem, but also rivers of that territory, because the rivers were less meandering. Erosion has slowed down there, and so the whole landscape changed. That's a good example of how one predator, one species changed the ecosystem of a huge area. What do I mean by this? What do I drive at? It's all interconnected. It's important to protect each species and think about the protection of each species, which used to function, to live, but unfortunately disappeared. Our organization is one of the biggest and most influential global international organizations, with a presence in more than 140 countries, including Ukraine. We have about 20 employees working in this organization in Ukraine. Our mission is to stop degradation of ecosystems, to make sure that that humanity lives in harmony with nature in the future. The main principle is using scientific approaches and foundations in implementing environmental projects, and all steps we take locally are based on scientifically grounded approaches. Our team have a degree, PhD degrees, including PhD in geography. We cover three important issues: forest, water, and rare species. And in each of these spheres, all our activities aim to protect biodiversity. Talking about forests, we mean I used to study primeval forests, and our professional team based on the methodology we developed on how to identify primeval forests. We register these primeval forests. We have singled out over 100,000 hectares of such forests, and the next step we're going to take is to mark these territories, and we're working towards that at different levels. We want to mark them at different levels. 20,000 have been marked. We try to preserve these unique areas in view of different reasons. These forests were not cut down. They were not. They are left intact. But nevertheless, it's one of the spheres on which we are working. We also try to amend legislation to include the definition of primeval forests. The forest section also deals with forest management issues. As for the water team, they deal with water bodies, marshlands, and talking about the rare species, that team also has a wide range of activities, including the mountainous region and in the center of Ukraine, in the middle of Ukraine, police it's called, and we try to protect brown and bears, and we try to protect umbrella species and their migration corridors. Our next goal is monitoring these predators. We use photo traps. Our Romanian colleagues use GPS. Some animals were chipped in Romania, but they cross the border and they migrate to Ukraine. We take samples of the DNA material, and we mentioned local populations. We try to make sure that there are fewer conflicts between human beings and wildlife, wild nature. In highlands, for example, some predators like bears would destroy beehives, and human beings, people, have a negative impression about this animal. This entails other activities connected with, poisoning of these animals or destruction of these animals, killing these animals. There are different practices widespread in Europe to prevent such conflicts in Europe. In Europe, we 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 installed 20 fences, electric fences, which we transferred to to bee apiarists, honeymakers, and shepherds or farmers who have with the sheep. So we want them to understand that it's important to live in harmony with nature. We shouldn't harm these predators like bears. Somehow they can protect these negative consequences, like by putting up these fences, electric fences. This helps harmonize the relations between people and nature. I also manage a project on the effect of transport infrastructure on biodiversity in our region. Of course, in neighboring countries, when they build a highway, they try to fragment environmental corridors, and not only where other bears, for example, but also other species. That creates a problem because there are some fences, and they have to destroy, to cut these fences to build these highways. It prevents, it stops these migration routes for animals which have existed for hundreds of years. We don't have such roads in Ukraine. Maybe fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. But in the future, sooner or later, they're going to build such highways in Ukraine, jointly with partners from other countries who have experience in building such biotransits or passes. Based on their experience, 1 month ago, jointly with the National Transport Institute, we developed state standards and technical conditions for biopasses. Our experts provided some recommendations, and the final product is going to be a state standard for the construction of biopasses when highways are built. That's one of the examples of our of the steps we take as one of the as I said, one of our activities is to build such biopasses. Just to help animals migrate. As for our, in general, our activities, our steps, we have a partnership with our Ukrainian railroad company. If you traveled around Ukraine, you could see some wildlife areas. One of the spheres we're developing is providing information not only to beginners, beginning to tourists, but also to experienced travelers who often travel to the mountains, Carpathians. We provide information on how to behave appropriately in an eco-friendly manner while traveling. How to behave when you encounter wild animals, how to handle rubber waste, how to make bonfires, where to make bonfires, some practical things, how to distinguish between different trees, plants. We cooperate with the national parks. On our website, you can see some information about our activities and the parks that we cooperate with. On our website, you can also find, I invite you to visit our website and Facebook page. We have we also posted advice to all those who want to live in harmony with nature. It applies to all of us. It applies to politicians, business people, and clergy, anyone, everyone. Do as little harm as possible. We provide advice how to achieve this. For example, we provide advice to businessmen on sustainable production, proper nutrition, how to behave while traveling in the mountains, how to behave at work, at home, just advice on sustainable development. We have possibilities to invite volunteers, if you want to do some charitable work, you can join us. We're always happy to welcome cooperation. We also offer petitions for signing. I invite everyone to sign this petition that I've just mentioned. I believe we have a slogan on our website, together we can do it. So I believe in this slogan. Each of us in our sphere of activity should understand that we live together with nature, and healthy nature is also means our health. And it means that if the nature is healthy, we are healthy, not only physically, but also spiritually, mentally, physiologically, emotionally. Together we can do that. We can achieve that. And I call upon everyone to join our movement, to our mission. Yeah, join our mission.
Thank you, Taras. And I have several questions that I wanted to ask you. The first question is probably not directly linked to wild nature, but we know that it is also there when we talk about urban areas and the EU, especially when we talk about the Green Deal. We know that restoration of urban biodiversity has been brought to attention. Urban biodiversity restoration is in the focus of attention, and it's possible in our case because our cities suffer a lot, because we know that green spaces are becoming less widespread, and we know that these green areas or spaces are very important because that is the criteria for cities to be selected as the greenest cities. I think Krakow tops the list, then we have some German city, and the third one is Tallinn, Estonia. And you know, this is some relative indicators, some 36% of forest and some 26% of greenery. So there can be a different proportion, and we have very good examples of some other German cities or towns. These were industrial locations, but now they have very many parks and gardens. But now, when we talk about Ukraine, and if you take a look at our regional centers, probably the situation could be better when we talk about districts, our rayons, because we know that probably there is not such a high level of construction there. But are there any recipes in terms of restoration of biodiversity on the level of cities, urban biodiversity? Because we know that we have authorities, and due to the decentralization reform, we know that they have very many new communities and they have some powers. So what is there to be done also to make sure that we have higher percentage of urban biodiversity? It's a very good question, because here we talk not only about restoration of biodiversity, it's also about preservation of such biodiversity. Take our city, we know that there are very many territories and they're being built up, and we understand that this economic part comes to the forefront, and people don't really think much about the value from these green spaces. And in the future, the people who will reside in these high-rise buildings, they will need some spaces to spend their time after work, for instance. So here's the question about the urban planning. I guess we have the master plan for the development of the city, and it's adopted, and it presupposes the structure of the green spaces, which has to be functioning, and there has to be a certain connection between these green areas. And I used to work when I think that I was back then I was the student, or a PhD student, and I worked in the senior park, and it's one of the biggest parks in Ukraine, actually, not only in the city. And thanks to the management of the park, it was possible to preserve it, and I'm hopeful that it will really preserve the status. It will be this green heart of our city of Lviv. And unfortunately, in our organization, we don't have enough resources also to work with urban spaces, because that's a complex task. And also it relates to huge economic resources. But a lot depends on the vision of local deputies and generally municipality, how they really want to use this environment, this setting that they manage. And here we can talk about different areas on the level of the city or some neighborhoods. They really need to understand that that's the place where they will continue living. And sometimes it's not always about the number of high-rise buildings that you can have or residential space. Yes, thank you. And I also know that WWF also deals with some nature-based solutions issue, and we already have some standard of the organization, and there are some guidelines, and we believe that some variants as vertical greening and some other roof greening will be used here with us. And there is another very innovative idea which is proposed by the Green Deal for the local authorities really to purchase, to buy these lands, and for them to become communal again. And of course, we have some legislative mechanisms to carry this off, but we know that it's possible actually to do that, and we're hopeful that it will be possible for us to preserve this biodiversity. And we know that it would be great for us to have the harmony when it comes to wildlife. And the UN declared this decade the year of the preservation of ecosystem. And the last question, you mentioned beavers, and just I wanted to ask, when I was a student, we had the course in environmental law, and there was a visiting professor from a different country, and he also mentioned this chain, but there was quite a simplified version. And there was beaver, who was the key character. There was a pond, and around it there were many wallows, and the water was very clean. There was fish, there were people and beavers, but there were some bad people, and they cut down trees. Then the water was gone from the pond, and well, people were not there because there was nothing there to spend time. And we know that it's easy to plant trees, but what about this general approach in terms of ecosystem? Because it really requires some ecosystem approach, this integral or comprehensive approach. So how do we bring back those beavers back, this key part of the chain? Yes, we know that beavers will return only when the trees will be there, because that's the source for them. Because this construction material is very important, but I can also provide an example. At WWF, some 6-7 years ago, we also restored one of the marshes, Black Marsh, and it's part of the National Reserve in Transcarpathian region. It's quite a unique ecosystem. And after that, there were no beavers. Actually, the water was very low, and back at Soviet times, they drained it. So these were actually dams, and there were channels built in there. So we used some funds for that, but we managed to close these channels, and water was preserved. That was this. We talk about the central marshes, and actually it was possible to have this nutrition coming from water. And surprisingly, after some 1 year of time, there were no beavers back then, but they started to appear, the families of beavers. And I think that after some very short period of time, some 12 months, we could really see that the water was raising some 1 meter. It was not a higher level, but still it caused some change in the ecosystem, and we really had these engineers of nature, as they are called. So this could be a good example. It's a great thing because really it's important for us to hear about some practical cases and examples, how you practically manage within such a short period of time, so 12 months. We know that for nature, it is a short period of time. It's like 1 second for a human being, or maybe even less, maybe some parts. And you're one of those few organizations which is brave enough to cooperate, to facilitate those processes of coexistence of human beings and nature, because we have very many traditional communities like Hutsuls. Well, they're not really indigenous peoples probably, but of course that we also have these indigenous people, and they have their own traditions and their way of living, and it's great that you managed to do that. So we wish you strength and energy, and many people who could support you. I mean, volunteers. That is also essential for people to understand the importance of what you do. And right now, I would like to invite the next speaker, that is Natalia Subodina, who is leading expert of the sector of integrity and corruption prevention of the City Head Administration Department of the Lviv State Administration. And Natalia will tell us more about philosophical and theological aspect of biodiversity. What about social teaching of the church in terms of biodiversity? And then she will tell us more about the international approach, about UN Convention on Biodiversity, CBD, that's the abbreviation which is used internationally, and the preparation of the framework deal after 2020, and some practical actions of Laudato Si cycle here in Lviv, and it would be of great interest to learn more about the community, about its activities. So Natalia, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. I also wanted to express my gratitude to the organizers, and participation at this forum is very important because here there are very many different social roles involved. As I graduated from Ukrainian Catholic University, I also represent the Lviv City Council, and I also participate in Konrad Adenauer program, and I also represent Laudato Si movement. So participation in this week is very important to me because this is some kind of transition, because next week I will start my studies at the doctoral program in Germany, and I will research the preservation of biodiversity of the Ukrainian Carpathians from the perspectives of regulatory framework at the crossroads of ethics, politics, and law. And today, probably that's not the topic that I wanted to bring up because I'm only starting to research it. I will talk about 3 important points that Svetlana has mentioned. The first one is social teaching of Catholic Church and biodiversity. I understand that we are pressed for time. It will be impossible for me to present the entire vision of the Catholic Church, but I want to share some relevant aspects which relate to today's forum. Another thing is international negotiations about some plans related to biodiversity globally. And at the end, I will also tell you about Laudato Si in Lviv and what it is that we actually do. So we start with social teaching of the church, and probably I'm not going to start with this very inception of Christianity, but of course there were already some thoughts dedicated to this topic. But I will start with the 20th century. Laudato Si is not the only encyclic about the environment. It's not really the first one. In 1987, the Pope of Rome mentioned about the connection of human beings and the environment in terms of the development in one of his documents, and he wrote about the fact that a human being was placed in a natural garden by God, and there the calling of people was to look after other creatures. But it's not that people really had to do it in their own way, but it had to also consider some norms, some frames in terms of subordination. So this framework was really set up. It's not that you have this absolute will to do whatever you want. There has to be some respect and care imposed. And also there was another important document in 1990, and that was another document by Peace with God the Creator. That was the name by the Pope, and that was the calling for the World Peace Day. And in this document, the Pope has said that peace in the world could also be put at threat because there is lack of respect towards nature. And he also stressed upon the fact that a human being should respect this internal balance of creation. And again, if we talk about philosophy and science and theology, we all know that there is a certain harmony in the universe, and there is this internal, very fragile balance. That is why the calling of people is to study this balance, to know more about that, to use it for some good purpose, but at the same time to make sure that there is integrity of this balance.
Human beings people shouldn't violate this balance, because it leads to destruction and poses a threat to peace. This message also mentions an important aspect of raising, of upbringing. It's not only the role of ecologists, but also of many stakeholders in society. We have to understand the value of nature. Good aesthetic education is of great importance. If a person is able to discern the beauty of nature, of creation, human beings understand the restorative nature of nature, of our world. Another important aspect is the respect for future generations, and there is a call to preserve nature for the sake of future generations. And it emphasizes that in the 1990s he already talked about environmental crisis, that it's a moral problem, it's a task for everyone, and even people who are not religious, do not profess any faith, those people should take care of our nature, because they know that they can perceive common good. And if people understand that creation is an expression of the glory of the Creator, so people who belong to the church should understand this. But not all Christians understand this, unfortunately. Some of them think it's a secondary thing, but in reality, some theologians say that this encyclica is progressive because it is about an internal value of creation, but the church from time to time has always called on people to listen to this, to understand this balance, to respect this balance, and this balance. So if human beings join our Creator in doing so. John Paul II, who also Karl Wojtyla, like to organize trips to the mountains, skiing in the mountains, or just staying in the nature. And he valued the nature for its restorative value. So, and as for Benedict the 16th, the next Pope, he also mentioned the environment in the context of development. In the context of development, which the world is going through, it should take into account the component of relation between human beings and nature, and we should nature expresses the conception, the concept of love and truth. And his encyclica was called Caritas, and I forgot. And he puts frameworks of what nature is and how the relations between people and nature should be perceived. And he cautions us against two extremes. If a person exalts nature over people, it can lead to neo-pantheism. On the other hand, another extreme is when human beings perceive nature as a resource, raw materials that can be used thoughtlessly to satisfy their needs, regardless of the consequences for the nature. And the Pope called on people to recognize the divine work and respect internal laws that ecosystems function by. And talking about Francis, the next Pope, the current Pope, so he develops these ideas and deepens these ideas. Francis emphasizes that nature is not only resources, creation has its own value, and it also glorifies God. He quotes German bishops of the 19th century who wrote about the priority of being over being useful. Another important role is according to the topic of connection. No creation is sustainable. All species are interdependent and they need one another. And I would like to quote Francis, the Pope Francis. The interdependence is what God wishes. So eagle and sparrow and other species, they are not isolated. They depend on each other to complement each other and serve each other. He uses very nice images: cider, small flower, other animals, different animals. He calls upon us to realize these values, and he calls us to love nature. It's about mystery that we have to reflect on with joy. He also mentions that creation is a source of joy, of awe, for the knowledge of divine creation. In a nutshell, to conclude, there is a big discussion about ecocentrism anthropocentrism. Christianity has prevailed for centuries, this anthropocentrism, and it was about the destiny of person, of what people were meant to do. But in the past, people didn't do so much harm to nature, and ecological problems are often connected with social problems and the construction of factories and plants, which harm nature through emissions and failure to comply with standards, environmental standards. They also do harm to people who work in horrible conditions, and it doesn't respect human dignity. So, without trying to find out which approach is more valuable, we should stop this exploitatory nature of consumerism, because otherwise humanity and creation will suffer. And there is a clear realization of interconnection between human and natural environments. The UN Council for Human Rights writes about the clear connection between human rights and biodiversity. Namely, I have a quote, maybe I'll find it: full using exercise of human rights, including rights to food and water, and it depends. Also, depends on the health of ecosystems, and it all that in its turn depends on biodiversity. So it all leads us back to human rights. I would like to move to the second component of my speech about international negotiations globally. Caroline mentioned at the beginning, this year we saw important negotiations between member states on biodiversity, and Mr. Taras mentioned today this convention and conference, which is going to be held in 2 stages. First stage from next week, online part of this conference, and the second stage at the end of April and beginning of May next year. This conference was scheduled earlier, but it was postponed due to the pandemic. What were the goals of this conference? To mark progress in goals. The goals is established by this Convention on Biodiversity for the years up to 2020. So it's time to adopt new goals, and this conference is going to review the implementation of these goals for the previous period and establish new frameworks in the sphere of biodiversity for the next period. We have a possibility we have access to the draft program, and based on these discussions, this document will be approved. This document is quite interesting. When approved, it will combine all efforts aimed to preserve biodiversity. It will promote not only the Convention on Biodiversity, it will be related to other conventions passed in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, and also related to other international agreements, treaties, and other instruments and trends in the sphere of protecting biodiversity globally. This new global program covers the period up to 2050, and it has intermediate goals for the period up to 2030. This program, very often in Ukraine, they think that biodiversity is a narrow sphere, but this program uses a wide and a systemic approach, and it says that we need transformations in different spheres: economic, social, financial models, and stabilized trends that worsen the loss of the problem of losing biodiversity. We can talk about reasons for losing biodiversity, the destruction of habitats, agriculture, deforestation, and another reason is excessive use of resources. For example, fish in the ocean, the spread of invasive species, and climate change, which also has a negative effect and exacerbates the problem of a loss of biodiversity. Talking about this global frame program for the period until 2030, it has 4 key goals. Only the first goal is related to biodiversity and ecosystems. The other 3 are related to human dimensions and financial dimensions. The first goal is about the integrity of all ecosystems. It also provides for expansion of areas, support for healthy and sustainable populations. The decrease in and the preservation of genetic biodiversity of by at least 90%. 3 components of biodiversity: integrity of ecosystems, and the support for healthy populations, and preservation of genetic biodiversity. Talking about more short-term goals, for the period till 2030, areas should be enlarged for biodiverse. Areas should be enlarged by 5% that are related to biodiversity. So scientists say that unfortunately, as of now, none of these goals have been implemented in full, have been met in full. So this new order is partially based on these goals, the same goals, and it provides hope that this time there will be relevant mechanisms and funding provided to ensure progress in preserving biodiversity and ecosystems. Talking about 3 other goals, the second one is the value of support and of contribution of human being to biodiversity to sustainable development. First goal was directly related to ecosystems, while the second goal is about social dimension of sustainable development. It's about biodiversity affecting not only sustainable development goals, sea ecosystems and surface ecosystems preservation, and other goals such as preservation of access to water and sanitary conditions, because quite often ordinary people don't think about this cycle of interdependence, that the quality of water depends on the forest on the outskirts of a city.
The third goal is fair distribution of income, what you can receive from the use of resources, to make sure that we have a fair distribution for the use of material and non-material benefits to preserve and rational use of biodiversity. What is meant here is the fact that we have some indigenous people, and for example, they have some traditional knowledge in terms of the utilization of some resources, and this can be used for medicine, and that is why some big corporations can have really some profit from that. And it means that those indigenous peoples, they lose it, because some people make money out of that using their resources, but what they receive is the loss of ecosystem. And the final goal is the liquidation of this gap that we have in terms of the money which is needed to implement this concept, and the money which is used for that. Here we talk about funding when we talk about preservation of biodiversity. Then this global framework program dedicated to biodiversity after 2020 pays some attention to the attitude of people to the issue of biodiversity, and to the fact that it's important to ensure that biodiversity is properly valued by people and accordingly maintained, used rationally, and it really helps to preserve all those services related to ecosystems and the healthy state of the planet, and it guarantees the well-being of each human being. Then, well, probably we don't really have much time to discuss it in detail, but apart from these general goals to 20 up to 2050 and intermediate goal to 2030, there are also some agendas, some tasks, some 21 tasks, and there are 3 categories of them. The first one being the decrease of different threats for biodiversity, those key threats that I have already outlined, the destruction of systems, excessive exploitation, invasive species, extreme pollution, and all of these threats can receive certain global solutions. But obviously, as this is framework program, all of that envisions attention from each state and local communities when we talk about some particular countries. And that is why, apart from this first category, the destruction of categories important for biodiversity, there's another one about the needs of people through sustainable use of biodiversity, and the third one is the tools and solutions for the processes of consideration, the topic of biodiversity while working on policies. And it's also very important to know that this topic has to be incorporated in some other documents which are adopted on the level of country. That is why when we talk about environmental issues, then it's not only about those regulatory acts which directly relate to, for example, some natural preservation areas, but also the very component of attention and care of environment has to become part of legislation which regulates economic activities to eliminate stimuli for the destruction of biodiversity, and to use all the possible tools which are in society, in the country, to have this mechanism. This is briefly about everything which is happening on the international level. We know that this period of the creation of this new global agenda in biodiversity after 2050 of the global program is quite long-term as any other strategic document. It envisages certain steps for bringing into alliance ideas of different stakeholders, and we understand that it is quite a long-term process. But for all of these great ideas to be practically implemented, one also needs to engage a wide spectrum of people from the entire world on national levels, and not only people who have some professional knowledge about the environment, because the ecologists, they are the people who know most about this aspect of fragility of ecosystems. And what is the interrelation between these ecosystems internally. But here we can also talk about the people who work on infrastructure projects. They consider this component as Taras mentioned. For example, when we talk about road construction, it's important also to take into consideration the ecosystem issue. And there's a very nice metaphor when we talk about this fragility of ecosystems. Some international experts compare ecosystems with a puzzle, and in fact, it's difficult for people to understand how many components of this puzzle are to be eliminated for this picture to fall apart. We understand this fragility aspect, and we know that even the knowledge that we have about ecology, about the environment and its protection do not really let us understand in advance what is the connection between all of these species and what is the connection in the ecosystem. Talking about biodiversity, paradoxically, mankind cannot even count all the species. We have some relative information, and we know that the differences are really huge. They account by several millions. Well, probably these are very diverse topics because we talk about social and Christian international negotiations, and then we talk about the practical aspect. But I want to tell you briefly about Laudato Si community in Lviv. It is not an NGO. It does not deal professionally with the topic of environmental protection, but this is an organization which functions following Laudato Si movement, which used to be Global Catholic Climate Movement. Here we talk about prayer, awareness, and action. And when we talk about this awareness, we really try to dig deep into a theological and scientific component and to understand better the status quo, the interconnection between all of these things, how the life of each of us can really impact biodiversity. And we try to really avoid such situations that impact. If you talk about our everyday life, taking into consideration this paradigm of think globally, act locally, we all know about the problem of tropical forest and their destruction. We know that palm oil is produced in huge volumes, and we know that for Ukraine, which is far away from tropical forests, it makes sense to refuse from the use of those goods which have palm oil in it, and there are different names actually which are also used, but of course that it requires this research and study for people to understand how they can impact biodiversity in their everyday life. Then when we talk about different chemical agents like that are used for household, we know that those phosphate washing powders, they also impact negatively our ecosystem, and it results in different losses in terms of marine life because there is very little level of oxygen. Well, probably I will not go into detail, but in our everyday decisions that we take, probably it's smart to choose smartly and to take care of the environment. Talking about local ecosystems, what can be done on locally in suburban areas. This is we can really clean our forests and from plastic, for example, because we know that, well, naturally they cannot really cleanse themselves, they cannot be recycled on their own, and in winter we feed squirrels and birds. This is a very banal and trivial thing, but this is also something which is needed. And we also support different initiatives which take care of animals in the city. We have the shelter of saved animals in Lviv. There was a tour that we had, and we tried to support their activities as well. And as far as the concept which was used by Pope Francis for us to practice love and to understand the value. It's great to go to nature and to get inspired by it, and also to have this observatory prior. So we went kayaking to the Dnistro River, and this year we went to Western Horhans. There is the village of one village, and there is a monastery there. It is one of the places in Ukraine where one can still see the species of animals which were mentioned by Taras, like bears and wolves, and local communities. They really came into contact with them, and they actually could see those rare species, and it's great that we still have them. And it's important that we really take good care of them and that we try our best to protect them. And what else about our organization, our involvement and contribution of our Christian community? Of course, prayer matters a lot, especially when we talk about different international events like this one, like the conference, where we have participants from different international conventions on biodiversity or climate change, COP26. And another thing that we can do is signing up a petition. There were two petitions mentioned, the petition on forest preservation and another one, Healthy Planet, Healthy People. Our community knows about that. We signed up this petition, we share the information about it amongst our friends and the people that we know. And another important component is us really trying to be respectful to nature in terms of our experience, also to share the knowledge, the information that we have with our friends, with our families, with people who are close to us, and to inspire each other mutually to respect the creation and realization of a Christian calling, which is taking care of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And since we're running out of time, we have 5 minutes left, and we're going to have future sessions later. Could you give us a word of advice? What you have been saying is very important. It strikes a chord with us. It affects our daily life. We understand that God is love, and the creation that you talked about today. And what should people do, people who haven't experienced this environmental conversion yet? If they listen to us, what should they do? What advice would you give us? What steps should they take to make sure that they notice the value of what is around us and start paying attention to these things? And because if each of us experiences this environmental conversion, we will start changing. All our communities will change. That's a very interesting question. The environmental conversion is a personal thing. You cannot impose that on anyone. So because it may not have a positive effect if you impose it. But while I listened to your question, I had an idea. You can go to the nearest park or forest, and after an exhaustive working day, very often we work in front of our computers all day or interpret in Zoom, we can go to the park and stay there in silence. Try to rest, to have a rest, to restore your energy. So, and feel that people need this nature reflecting on in silence, and we have to be aware of the value of the beauty of flowers, of trees, which can inspire us to be active in other spheres. We have to realize that it's an integral part of us. If it disappears, it will be a big problem, and it will be irreplaceable. And it cannot replace all other architectural constructions. It's irreplaceable values. If you are a believer, you can pray in nature, talk to God and listen to his answer. Thank you, Natalie. And to conclude, I would like to say, because Laudates Movement is our partner and co-organizer of this social economic ecumenical week, we're going to start developing a new sphere of our activities against fossil fuels. We're going to develop advocacy. We want to make sure that the voice of this moment is heard in different other moments, local, national, transnational, international, and we hope that they can change something about our policies from national to global levels. Thanks to everyone who was attended this session. Thank you for your time, for your work, for your convictions that move and motivate you. Caroline Kiolny was with us today. Katerina Polyanska from International Organization. Taras Yemelinets from WWF Ukraine. Natalia Subotina, and she has a master's degree in law. Thanks to everyone. Good luck to you all. Thank you.
Інститут екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці з фондом Конрада Аденауера за підтримки Львівської міської ради запрошують до участі у міжнародному суспільному форумі.
З 5 по 9 жовтня 14-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень, плекаючи спільне благо разом до сталого розвитку суспільства.
Як спільними зусиллями досягати цілей сталого розвитку та будувати справедливий світ?
Як зберегти довкілля, біорізноманіття, екосистеми суші та води? Як адаптувати міста до змін клімату?
Які перспективи європейський зелений курс відкриває Україні? Яка роль бізнесу у розвитку суспільства? Як сучасна церква сприяє сталому розвитку? Крізь призму екології, економіки, інклюзії та екуменічного соціального вчення досліджуємо цілі сталого розвитку